Robert Spencer here for Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and for the Center for Security Policy. What if World War II had been reported the way the establishment media writes about the global jihad today? The question is pertinent in light of the ongoing demonization of President Trump's advisor, Stephen K. Bannon, who was recently vilified by the establishment media for a 10-year-old unproduced film project discussing the jihad threat. Matea Gold of the Washington Post described the film in lurid terms. She said, "The flag fluttering above the U.S. Capitol is emblazoned with a crescent and star. Chants of Allahu Akbar rise from inside the building." That's the provocative opening scene of a documentary-style movie outlined 10 years ago by Stephen K. Bannon that envisioned radical Muslims taking over the country and remaking it into the Islamic States of America, according to a document describing the project obtained by the Washington Post. Hate-mongering, fear-mongering, am I right? Well, Matea Gold didn't bother to ask Omar Ahmed what he thought about this. Ahmed was the co-founder and longtime board chairman of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, and he once said, "Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to become dominant. The Quran, the Muslim book of scripture, should be the highest authority in America, and Islam the only accepted religion on earth." Ahmed now denies saying those words, but the original reporter still stands by her story. And CAIR spokesman Ibrahim Hooper once said, "I wouldn't want to create the impression that I wouldn't like the government of the United States to be Islamic sometime in the future." So said Honest Ebe. Meanwhile, according to a captured internal document, the Muslim Brotherhood, to which all major Muslim groups in the U.S. are linked, is dedicated to, in its own words, eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house, so that it falls and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. Then there's Abu Musa, the Washington, D.C. imam, who said several years ago that he wants to establish an Islamic State of America by the year 2050. Matea Gold mentions none of this. Steve Bannon is the one who actually did his homework, and for this he is described as a bigoted Islamophobe. Gold also says, "The proposal names 24 conservative writers and terrorism experts who could serve as potential on-screen guests, including Robert Spencer, director of the Jihad Watch website, who is labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-Muslim propagandist." Am I now? Now imagine if this were 1930, and the Southern Poverty Law Center existed, and it issued a lavishly illustrated, meticulously documented report on critics of the Nazis, dubbing them anti-German propagandists or anti-German hate group leaders. The lavish publication would include profiles of Winston Churchill, journalist Edgar Maurer, and other early critics of Hitler, noting that when each had made false claims about Hitler, false that is according to the Nazis, and charging them with hate and anti-German bias. Imagine if the mainstream media, whenever it quoted Churchill, Maurer, or the others, described them as anti-German, and noted that the Southern Poverty Law Center said they were anti-German propagandists and hate group leaders. They would call them rabble-rousers and demagogues. Quotes from Goebbels and Goering would invariably be included, calmly explaining the truth and patiently answering questions about what a shame it was that they had to deal with the likes of Churchill and other hate-mongers. This kind of coverage would be universal. Critics of Nazism would never be described in the mainstream media in anything but pejorative terms. Whenever they received media attention, they would be challenged to respond to charges that they were anti-German and spreading hate. Their views would more often be presented by the SPLC itself and others who dubbed them anti-German, more often than they themselves would get a chance to explain themselves. The leading authorities the media consulted about Hitler and Nazism would be favorable to both, and opposed only to excessive violence by the brown shirts, which they describe as inconsistent with the spirit of Nazism. Meanwhile, the critics would be constantly vilified, ridiculed, likened to the Ku Klux Klan and other genuinely hateful groups. People would write that they wanted to attack them physically, and that it would be legitimate to do so. Imagine that this situation prevailed without any cracks in the edifice for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Imagine that it prevailed as Hitler came to power, as he began persecuting the Jews, as he began his rearmament of Germany, as he bullied weak Western leaders who were anxious to appease him anyway into allowing him to take Austria and Czechoslovakia, and finally as he invaded Poland and the Western powers finally decided to fight back. Imagine that every step Britain, France, and ultimately the Soviet Union and the United States took to defend themselves against Hitler and the Nazis was decried by the establishment media and a huge segment of the American public as anti-German, as a manifestation of hatred and bigotry. Imagine if every step FDR took to prosecute the war was denounced and even voided by federal court orders. And he was derided as a fool, a criminal, an authoritarian ruler, and there were open calls, not only for his impeachment, but for a coup to remove him from power, and even numerous calls for his assassination. In that scenario, which side do you think would have won the war? I'm Robert Spencer.